A monk enters the library of an ancient temple, his footsteps slow, almost reverent, as if he's walking on sacred ground. Because he is. The library is not grand in size, but its presence is powerful. Dust particles dance in the shafts of golden sunlight, pouring in through the wooden lattice windows. The smell of aged parchment, ink, and incense lingers in the air. This is a place where time does not rush. Here, each book holds more than 100 stories. They are doorways to lifetimes, echoes of masters who once walked barefoot along stone paths, who whispered truths into silence, whose very breath moved with the rhythm of the universe. The monk's robes sway gently as he walks past the shelves, lined with scriptures and scrolls. He isn't looking for anything in particular, or perhaps he is searching without knowing what he is searching for. He pauses before a small wooden case, its door slightly ajar. Inside rests a single scroll wrapped in faded red silk, sealed not with wax, but with an intricate knot, one used in the old days when teachings were hidden, not because they were forbidden, but because they were sacred. He lifts the scroll with both hands, cradling it like a child. The knot slips loose, as if it too had been waiting for this moment. When he unrolls the scroll, he finds not commandments or laws, but a simple story. A story not told to impress or instruct, but to awaken. It begins with a man, ordinary in appearance, yet restless in spirit. The man lived in a quiet village, surrounded by hills and rivers and the slow heartbeat of the earth. He had a home, a family, and a life that many would consider peaceful. But he could not shake the sense that something essential was missing. He felt like a man standing at the edge of something vast and invisible, something he couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. He had tried everything to fill that space. He read books, chased passions, attended gatherings where people promised enlightenment. He meditated, he fasted, he listened to teachers who spoke of detachment, of transcendence, of stillness. But even when his mind was quiet, his heart was loud. There was a longing deeper than desire, a hunger not of the body, but of the soul. And so, one morning, before the sun rose, he set off on a journey. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he had to go. Days turned into weeks. He wandered through forests where even the birds seemed to sing with intention. He crossed rivers that whispered secrets through their ripples. He slept under stars so bright, he forgot for a moment that he had ever lived beneath a roof. And yet, despite the beauty around him, the feeling remained. That emptiness, that unanswered question. Why am I here? One evening, as dusk folded itself gently over the hills, he came upon a small shrine carved into the side of a cliff. It was old, so old that the carvings on its stone face had almost faded, but the energy that emanated from it was unmistakable. It was not the grandeur of the place that called to him, but the stillness. He entered, bowed low, and sat cross-legged before a statue of a seated sage whose face was both serene and sorrowful. It was a paradox that mirrored his own heart. As he closed his eyes, something inside him began to unravel. He sat in silence for hours, maybe days. He couldn't tell. The world outside ceased to matter. Thoughts came and went, like clouds drifting across the sky. Memories surfaced, his childhood, his fears, his longing to be enough, his failures, his deepest loves. He saw them all not as burdens, but as visitors. And one by one, he welcomed them. "Come," he whispered, "you too are part of me." Then came a moment when even the visitors faded, and in that vast, expansive space, he heard something. Not a voice, not words, just a knowing, a truth so simple it didn't need language. You are not broken, you are becoming. The realization didn't explode like fireworks. It arrived like breath, subtle, necessary. He opened his eyes and found tears falling without effort. Not tears of sadness, not even joy, just the natural response to finally being seen, not by another, but by himself. The monk in the temple finishes reading the scroll, his fingers gently tracing the last line. He doesn't need commentary. The story has done what it was meant to do. It has reminded him, awakened him, that the journey we are all on is not about finding something outside of us. It's about returning, not to a location, but to a state of being. A state where we no longer fear the silence within. A state where the mind bows to the heart. A state where stillness is no longer a threat, but a sanctuary. He rolls up the scroll again, reties the faded silk, and places it back in the case. He bows not to the scroll, but to the moment, to the remembering. And as he walks out into the courtyard, the light is different, not brighter, not darker, just more real, as if the world has shed a layer of illusions, revealing the soft pulse underneath. He stands for a while, watching leaves fall from an old tree. One by one they release, effortlessly, without drama, without regret. And the monk smiles, because he understands now what the man in the story came to learn. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is let go. Not because we're giving up, but because we're coming home. The monk walked the temple grounds with a calm that didn't come from the absence of struggle, but from the mastery of surrender. Around him, the air carried the faint fragrance of cedar and wild jasmine, and the sound of wind brushing through the tall bamboo whispered something sacred, something ancient. He moved as if the earth itself recognized his steps, not as an outsider treading on borrowed land, but as one returning home. With each footfall, he remembered, peace doesn't live in faraway places. It lives in presence. That evening, as the sun dipped low beyond the temple walls, casting golden hues over weathered stone, the monk sat under a tree whose roots were older than the stories inscribed in the library scrolls. He remembered the story he had read earlier. The man who had left behind everything to seek what could never be bought or taught, only realized. The truth of that tale still lingered in his body like incense in fabric, a quiet resonance in his bones. And as the monk closed his eyes, he felt that same journey stir within him. Not a journey of distance, but of depth. He had not always been a monk. Before these robes, before the chants and the morning bells, he too had lived a life caught in the current of the world. His days once danced to the rhythm of ambition, and his nights pulsed with unanswered questions he was too tired to ask. In those days, his joy came in short-lived bursts, achievements, applause, moments of affection that always felt too brief. And behind each moment of happiness, there was a shadow, a quiet wondering. What happens when the applause fades? Who am I when no one is looking? That question haunted him for years. He tried to answer it with titles, with relationships, with the pursuit of perfection. But the more he chased, the more hollow he felt. He began to realize that the self he had been trying to build was made of mirrors. Every reflection was a piece of someone else's approval, and when he stood still, truly still, there was no voice left, only echo. So he did what few are willing to do. He let it fall apart. He left the life he had known, not in anger, but in quiet resolve. He shaved his head. He wrapped himself in robes. He entered the temple not to escape the world, but to meet himself without distraction. The first months were the hardest. Stillness has a way of confronting you with everything you've refused to feel. Thoughts he had long suppressed surfaced like ghosts. Regrets, fears, guilt. Old wounds reopened not to torment him, but to be acknowledged, to be healed. He remembered how one of the elder monks had told him, "The mind is like a restless child. You don't silence it by shouting, you calm it by holding." And so, day after day, breath after breath, he learned to hold space for himself, to watch the mind with compassion, to feel his pain without becoming it, to sit in discomfort without trying to escape. And in doing so, he discovered a peace that was not the absence of emotion, but the full presence of being. It was during those long hours of meditation that he first began to understand impermanence, not as a concept, but as a lived truth. He watched thoughts rise and fall. He watched emotions swell and recede. He watched how even the tightest knots within him began to loosen when he stopped pulling. Everything passed: joy, sorrow, confusion, clarity. And in that realization, he stopped clinging. He stopped resisting. He let life move through him like a river. One night he stood alone in the temple garden under a sky flooded with stars. No distractions, no noise, just the quiet hum of existence. He looked up and whispered, "If this is all there is, it's enough." And for the first time, he truly meant it. Not because he had found all the answers, but because he had stopped needing them. Since then, he had lived simply. He rose with the sun, swept the floors, tended the gardens, recited prayers not to impress any divine being, but to align himself with what was already sacred within. He shared silence with others who came to seek. He offered guidance not from superiority, but from shared humanity. He did not call himself enlightened. He called himself aware, and that, he knew, was the greater gift. Now beneath the ancient tree, as the stars once again began to fill the sky, he reflected on the visitors who had come through the temple gates. So many faces, so many stories. Each of them believing they were broken, each of them convinced they needed fixing, but he never saw brokenness. He saw forgetting. Each person had simply forgotten their essence, forgotten their breath, forgotten the wisdom that lived in their stillness. There was the man who came burdened with grief, carrying a photo of the child he had lost. He could barely speak. His hands trembled. His silence screamed louder than words. The monk had sat beside him, not offering answers, but offering presence. They watched the sun rise together in silence for 7 mornings, and on the 8th, the man wept, not because the pain had vanished, but because the silence had made space for it to breathe. "I still miss her," he said, and the monk nodded. "Then love her that way, in every breath, in every step." There was the woman who arrived angry at the world, fists clenched, words sharp. She had been betrayed, abandoned, left to pick up pieces alone. She wanted justice. She wanted retribution. But as the days passed, her rage softened into sorrow. The monk had given her a broom and told her, "Sweep the leaves, not the past." And day after day, as she cleared the courtyard, she began to clear her heart, until one morning she whispered, "I forgive him." And the monk replied, "Then you are free." Each soul that arrived at the temple came carrying something, but more importantly, each soul left with less. Not less love, not less hope, but less weight. And that was the beauty of true wisdom. It doesn't add, it removes. It strips away the illusions, the false identities, the hardened layers that keep us from ourselves. The monk looked around the temple grounds as the wind began to stir. He smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because he no longer needed it to be. Life, in all its messiness, was sacred. Every moment, even the painful ones, were invitations to wake up, to return, to remember. And tonight, as the moon rose full and bright above the trees, he bowed, not to the sky, but to the ground, to the moment, to the path that had led him here. A gentle rain began to fall just before dawn, tapping softly on the temple's stone roof, echoing through the wooden beams like nature's own heartbeat. The monk was already awake, not because of the sound, but because waking before the world did had become part of his breath. He stepped out into the courtyard, letting the cool drops touch his skin without flinching, without resisting. Rain, he had come to learn, asks for nothing. It simply arrives, cleansing, nourishing, honest. And in this honesty, it became a teacher. He stretched his palms to the sky, letting the water collect in the lines of his hand, like offerings from the heavens. His breath was slow and deep, his eyes closed. He whispered a mantra, not from rote memory but from the marrow of his being. I accept. Just those two words, no conditions, no bargaining, just the surrender to what was. Rain, stillness, breath, life. Acceptance, he had discovered, was not passive. It was the bravest act he had ever committed. To accept what he could not change, to sit with pain without turning it into a story, to meet himself in the mirror without judgment. That was the heart of his path, not to transcend life, but to embrace it so fully that even the sorrow became sacred. Years ago, during his early days in the monastery, he had struggled with this idea. He thought spiritual life meant escaping discomfort, that it meant always being calm, always centered. But true wisdom, he learned, is not about controlling your experience. It's about entering it fully, about being the witness and the participant at once, feeling deeply without drowning, seeing clearly without clinging. He thought of the man who had come to the temple just 3 seasons ago, a scholar, brilliant, skeptical, articulate. He had read every text, studied every school of thought, but he was tired. Tired of the words, tired of the theories, tired of living from the neck up. I've understood everything, he said, but I still feel empty. The monk had offered him tea in silence. No debate, no teaching, just presence. And over the weeks, the scholar began to unravel. He cried during a morning chant. He laughed during a walking meditation. He wrote poetry on stones and left them along the riverbank. When he left, he bowed low and said, I came here looking for answers, but I found something better, myself. This is what the monk knew to be true. Awakening isn't loud. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes in moments so quiet, most people miss them. It comes when you finally stop searching and start listening. To the wind, to your breath, to the ache in your chest that isn't asking to be solved, but held. He sat under the covered edge of the temple porch, watching the rain continue its gentle descent. A leaf fell from the roof and landed in a puddle, sending small ripples outward. He followed those ripples with his eyes, thinking about how every action, every word, every silence creates waves, seen or unseen. We are all throwing stones into the great still water of existence. The question is not whether we make ripples, but what kind. Later that morning, he joined the others for chanting. The main hall was dimly lit, incense curling in the corners like ancient breath. The sound of voices rising together, not for performance, but for resonance, filled the space. The vibration of each syllable stirred something beyond thought. The monk didn't chant to be heard, he chanted to remember. With each breath, each sound, he realigned himself with something older than language, something that lived not in the mind, but in the heart. Afterward, during the silent meal, he noticed one of the younger monks struggling. The boy's shoulders were tense, his hands shaky as he tried to keep his bowl steady. The monk didn't speak. He simply reached over and steadied the boy's hands with his own. For a moment, their eyes met. And in that quiet exchange, more was said than 100 lessons. Sometimes the greatest kindness is presence. Sometimes healing begins not with words, but with someone who doesn't flinch when you tremble. That afternoon, as the clouds parted and sunlight returned in gentle waves, the monk wandered to the back garden, where wildflowers grew between stones and bees hummed their unbroken songs. He sat cross-legged on the ground, placing his hand on the soil. He could feel its warmth, its heartbeat. He pressed his palm down gently and whispered, I belong. That phrase had once felt foreign. To belong. For much of his life, he had believed that belonging meant fitting in, being accepted, being praised. But now he understood something deeper. Belonging wasn't about being approved of. It was about remembering that you are not separate, that even in your solitude, you are part of everything. The wind, the roots, the fire, the silence. You are not a visitor. You are the ground itself. He looked up and noticed a bird nesting in the rafters of the temple roof. It watched him too, curious but unafraid. They sat like that for a long while, the monk and the bird just existing, not asking anything of one another, not trying to prove anything, just breathing the same air, sharing the same moment. And that, he thought, is love. Not the kind that clings or demands, not the kind that seeks validation, but the kind that allows everything to be as it is. The kind that sees without needing to change. The kind that sits beside joy and sorrow with equal reverence. As the sun began to dip once more behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the stone path, the monk rose slowly, his knees stiff but his spirit light. He walked the length of the courtyard, barefoot, feeling every texture beneath him. The warmth of sunlit stone, the coolness of shaded earth, the slight dampness where the rain had yet to dry. Each step a prayer, each step a poem. He paused before the library again, where the scroll still rested, wrapped once more in red silk. He didn't need to reread it. The story now lived within him. It had never truly been about the man on the journey. It had always been about all of us, seeking, searching, forgetting, remembering, letting go. He bowed his head, not to the scroll, but to the silence around it. And then he turned and disappeared into the golden light of evening, not walking away from anything, but walking deeper into himself. The days in the temple did not follow the tempo of the outside world. There were no deadlines, no rush, no digital clock blinking reminders of time lost or gained. Here, life unfolded according to the rhythm of breath, of nature, of the soft discipline of awareness. And in this deliberate slowness, the monk began to notice the quiet transformation taking place, not just around him, but within. One morning he sat at the edge of the pond just as the first light stretched itself across the water. Mist floated above the surface like a veil between worlds, and the reflection of the sky shimmered with colors not found in any paint. He dipped his fingers into the water and watched the ripples dance outward. For a long time he just watched. There was no hurry to name the experience, no urge to capture it in words or memory. He had begun to unlearn the habit of rushing past beauty in search of something more meaningful. He realized now, this was it, this moment, this breath, this quiet reflection that asked for nothing and gave everything. There had been a time when he chased meaning like it was a finish line, believing it lived in some grand realization or profound event. But the deeper he sank into silence, the more he discovered that meaning was everywhere, already humming beneath the surface. In the way a petal unfolds without resistance, in the sound of wind catching the corners of a prayer flag, in the pause between his heartbeat and the next. He remembered the traveler who had once come to the temple gates, weary and skeptical, with eyes full of questions and a heart guarded by years of disappointment. The traveler had asked, "What is the meaning of life?" And the monk, without speaking, handed him a bowl of rice. Noticing the flavors, the warmth, the effort someone had poured into the meal, he began to weep, because in that moment he understood. The meaning of life is not hidden in complexity. It is revealed in presence, in simplicity, in gratitude for what is, rather than what we imagine should be. The monk had always believed in the quiet power of such gestures. He had seen how offering a flower could speak louder than offering advice, how simply listening, truly listening, could heal more than 100 spoken affirmations. Most of the people who came to the temple didn't need answers. They needed space, space to unravel, to feel, to remember who they were before the world told them who to be. And as he watched the mist on the pond fade into the morning light, he reflected on his own moments of forgetting. How many times he had measured his worth by his usefulness, his productivity, his ability to meet expectations. How often he had silenced his own needs to preserve harmony. But harmony built on suppression is not peace, it is performance. And slowly, gently, he had begun to release that performance. Not all at once. Healing never demands speed, but little by little the mask fell. Now, when he looked into the eyes of others, he didn't look for stories or identities. He looked for stillness, for presence, for the light behind the layers. And when he saw it, even for a flicker, he bowed inwardly, because seeing another clearly is an act of grace. That afternoon, he walked the temple grounds, his hands folded behind his back, feet bare against the sun-warmed stones. A butterfly followed him for a while, flitting from blossom to blossom as if keeping time with his pace. He smiled. The butterfly reminded him of transformation, not the dramatic kind people speak of when they talk about change, but the quiet kind. The kind that happens slowly, in the dark, beneath the surface. The kind you don't notice until one day you realize your wings have grown. Transformation, he knew, wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about peeling away the layers that never belonged in the first place, about unlearning the noise, about returning to the original rhythm of your own soul. He paused at the old fig tree, where offerings were sometimes left. Someone had placed a small wooden figure at the base, a simple carving of a seated figure with hands resting gently on its lap. There was no plaque, no explanation, just presence. He bowed before it, not because of what it represented, but because someone had left it in devotion. That act, he believed, carried more power than any sermon. Devotion without the need for recognition, love without condition. That was the essence of the path. In the evening, as the temple bells echoed through the valley, the monks sat with a group of younger disciples, sharing tea under the moonlight. One of them, a boy with sharp eyes and an open heart, asked him softly, "When did you first feel peace?" The monk didn't answer right away. He sipped his tea, letting the question settle like leaves steeping in water. Then he said, "The first time I stopped running from myself." The boy didn't ask more. He nodded and silence returned. Not awkward, not heavy, but sacred. They all sat in that shared quiet, the night wrapped around them like a blanket. In that space, nothing needed to be explained. They were together, breathing the same air, feeling the same stillness. And it was enough. Later that night, the monk returned to his room and lit a single candle. The flame flickered, casting soft shadows on the walls, like memories dancing in the corners of his mind. He sat in front of it, spine straight, eyes soft, breath deep. He did not try to control his thoughts. He did not seek enlightenment. He simply sat with himself, with the night, with the soft hum of everything. And as the flame danced, he whispered a prayer, not to a god, but to the moment. May I remain here. May I remember what I've forgotten. May I continue to bow, not to power, not to fear, but to truth, to presence, to now. Before sunrise the next day, the monk was already awake. The temple was still, cloaked in the soft breath of early dawn. He sat in his meditation space, a small alcove facing east, where the first light always touched the floor like a blessing. His eyes were half closed, his breath steady, his spine like a tree rooted in something deeper than muscle or bone. He didn't chase thoughts away. He didn't grasp at clarity. He simply rested in awareness, allowing whatever arose to pass through, like wind through open windows. In that stillness, he felt the presence of something vast and unnameable. Not outside of him, but within. A quiet knowing that all of this, every breath, every ache, every joy, was part of the same sacred fabric. Nothing to fix, nothing to escape. Just this moment, just this breath, and it was enough. After his practice, he walked through the temple garden, barefoot, the cool morning dew soaking into his feet. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if in conversation with the earth. The stones beneath him were smooth and cold, each one placed with intention by hands long gone. He reached the pond, now still and clear, the mist having lifted with the sun's slow rise. A dragonfly hovered above the surface, wings catching light like shards of crystal. He watched it with a kind of reverence usually reserved for holy texts. Nature, after all, was the first scripture. He had come to understand that the truest wisdom isn't always spoken, it's felt. It arrives without fanfare. It hums beneath the noise of thinking. And to hear it, you don't need credentials. You need silence. You need to unlearn the urgency. You need to become soft enough to be touched by the ordinary. That morning, he spent time cleaning the temple floors, sweeping dust that had settled in corners, rinsing old bowls in silence. These tasks weren't chores. They were devotion, acts of presence, of reverence. Each stroke of the broom, each drop of water, became a way of saying thank you, not just to the space, but to life itself, to the fact that he had been given another day to live, to breathe, to remember. The elders used to say that how you do one thing is how you do everything. At first, he didn't understand, but now it made perfect sense. If you rush through a simple task, what else are you rushing through? If you bring awareness to washing a cup, might you also bring it to your grief, to your joy, to the sound of your friend's voice? Awareness, he had learned, was not a switch you flipped. It was a practice, a way of living, a way of loving. Later that day, a visitor arrived at the temple gate. She was middle-aged, her shoulders slightly hunched, eyes sunken but kind. She carried no suitcase, just a small cloth bag and a journal worn from years of use. The monk welcomed her without question. In the temple, stories unfolded when they were ready, not when they were demanded. She was given a space to sleep, a cup of tea, and an invitation to silence. Over the following days, the woman joined the others in the garden, helping trim the trees, mend the paths, clean the offering bowls. She rarely spoke, but her presence was clear, grounded, heavy in a beautiful way, like rain before it falls. On the fourth day, as she sat beside the monk in the courtyard, she whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." Her voice cracked around the words, but there was no drama in them, just truth, honest, raw, and ready. The monk didn't respond with teachings. He simply looked at her and said, "Then this is the perfect place to begin." She smiled through her tears, and something inside her softened, just enough for the light to come through. That's what the temple was. A place not of answers, but of beginnings. A place where people didn't come to find their old selves, but to shed the costumes, the expectations, the stories that no longer served them. To sit with the silence and allow something real to emerge. Not something polished, not something others applauded, but something true. That evening, the monk lit incense in the main hall, the smoke spiraling up like memory. He walked the perimeter slowly, bowing to the four directions, giving thanks, not for what he had gained, but for what he had let go. His need to be understood, his fear of not being enough, his old compulsion to hold on when what he needed was to release. Letting go, he had learned, was not a one-time act. It was a daily choice, sometimes hourly, to release the thought that said, "I must prove myself," to release the pressure to perform peace rather than live it, to release the belief that his worth was tied to his usefulness. In that release, he found freedom, not the kind that comes with applause, but the kind that comes with a quiet heart. That night, he sat once more beneath the stars. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and distant smoke. He wrapped a shawl around his shoulders and looked up, not for answers, but for remembrance. The stars didn't need purpose to shine. They didn't question their place in the sky. They simply were. And that was their beauty. That was their power. He placed his hands in his lap, palms facing upward, and whispered a simple prayer, not to the stars, but to the stillness between them. May I meet myself with kindness. May I speak only what is true. May I carry nothing I no longer need. May I remember that this breath, this moment is enough. And in the silence that followed, he felt no need to speak again. Dawn returned again, not with urgency, but with grace. The temple grounds shimmered under the golden blush of morning light, and dew hung like blessings on every blade of grass. The monk stepped outside quietly, barefoot as always, his breath syncing with the rhythm of the world around him. There was no ritual today beyond presence, no agenda beyond noticing. Each inhale was a reminder, each exhale a letting go. He made his way toward the outer garden, where rows of lanterns stood along the edge of a stone path. Some were lit during festival nights, but most remained unlit, symbols of potential, of light yet to be called forward. He paused before one of them, placing his hand on its weathered frame. It felt cool beneath his palm, but alive, waiting. Just like every soul that had wandered through this temple, dim, not because they were broken, but because the world had convinced them to hide their flame. He reflected on the visitors who had passed through in recent months, each one a mirror, each one a mystery. The young man who feared he would never be forgiven, the elder who wept for the time he had lost chasing status, the child who sat in perfect silence, her gaze as old as the mountains, and the woman with the journal who now walked each morning with her shoulders a little lighter, her eyes more open. None of them were fixed, because none of them were broken. The monk had come to understand that we are not puzzles in need of solving. We are gardens, and some parts are in bloom, while others are resting, healing, waiting for spring. He remembered his own winters, those long inner seasons where he questioned everything, his worth, his path, his silence. But it was within those winters that the roots had deepened, the strength had grown, the truth had begun to whisper. Truth, he now believed, never shouts. It waits in stillness, in the moment you finally stop running, in the silence you once feared, in the ache that you dared to feel without fleeing. The monk had found his truth not in chants or teachings, but in sweeping the temple floor, in sipping tea slowly, in watching a single leaf fall and knowing it had no regrets. Later that day, he sat beneath the Bodhi tree near the southern wall. Its branches reached out like arms open in eternal welcome, and its leaves rustled with the sound of time itself. Beneath that tree, he had sat for years, not always seeking enlightenment, sometimes just to breathe, sometimes just to remember that he was enough, that the moment was enough, that this ordinary, extraordinary life was not a mistake or a test, but a gift. He had once thought awakening would be dramatic, a flash of insight, a blinding light. But his awakening had been different, quieter, gentler, like a fog slowly lifting, revealing the path that had always been there beneath his feet, like remembering a melody he had always known but forgotten how to hum. Now he spent his days not as a teacher, but as a witness. He didn't need followers, he needed presence. He offered stories not to preach, but to invite. He held silence not to control, but to soften. He allowed others to arrive just as they were, trusting that the temple, and life itself, would do the work it needed to do, without force, without pressure. As twilight approached, the monk lit a lantern near the gate. It was an old ritual, not for ceremony but for remembrance, a way of saying, even when the world goes dark, there is always light waiting to be seen. And as he lit the wick, the small flame flickered to life, dancing in the evening air. That flame, to him, was sacred, not because it banished the darkness, but because it coexisted with it, gently, without war. He thought of the scroll in the library, the story that had started all of this, the man who went on a journey only to discover that what he had been seeking was not out there, but within. That story had never really ended, because it was never just one man's journey, it was everyone's. And now, as he stood before the open gate, the night wrapping itself around the temple like a shawl, he felt the story continue, in every traveler who came, in every soul who dared to stop, to sit, to see. He didn't need to speak the ending aloud, because there was no ending, just another beginning, woven into the breath of the world. He turned toward the temple, walking slowly, the light of the lantern guiding his path. Behind him, the wind stirred gently through the trees, and the stars began to reveal themselves one by one, not with urgency, but with certainty. He paused once more, just before reaching the steps, and closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw everything: the laughter, the grief, the letting go, the becoming, the stillness that had once felt like emptiness, now rich with meaning. He smiled, not because everything made sense, but because he no longer needed it to. He whispered into the night, a final prayer not to the heavens, but to the quiet truth within. May I carry this stillness wherever I go. May I speak not to impress, but to connect. May I meet each moment as if it were sacred, because it is. May I be the lantern, not the flame. Silent, steady, offering light without asking for anything in return. And with that, the monk stepped into the shadows of the temple. the door closing softly behind him. Not as an end, but as a continuation, because the awakening never truly ends. It only deepens. In the quiet aftermath of these awakenings, the individuals who had once wandered through life as if in a daze began to forge new paths. They started to notice that the moments of silence, those precious pauses that once frightened them, were actually the spaces where life's most profound truths resided. It was in those moments, when the world was stripped of its constant chatter and expectation, that you could finally hear the soft murmur of your inner voice. That voice, once drowned out by the clamor of everyday demands, now spoke clearly. You are enough. You are whole. You have always been. And as you listen to that voice, something remarkable happens. The sharp edges of past wounds begin to blur. The heavy chains of self-doubt start to crumble. Slowly, imperceptibly, you begin to remember who you truly are, beneath all the layers of pretense. In the journey of returning to yourself, there are days when the memories of old hurts come flooding back. The sting of a lost love, the ache of a missed opportunity, the lingering pain of betrayal, all these feelings might resurface, uninvited and unbidden. And rather than pushing them away, you learn to greet them with a quiet kindness. You allow yourself to feel without judgment, recognizing that each emotion is a part of the vast tapestry of your being. You understand that pain, like beauty, is transient. It is not a permanent state, but a dynamic part of your ever-changing life. With each passing day, you become more adept at holding these feelings gently, letting them move through you like waves on a shore, knowing that no wave is permanent. And in this gentle holding, you discover that every tear, every moment of sorrow, carries the seed of a new beginning. In that same space, hope begins to take root. Not the brittle kind that is forced and fleeting, but a deep, abiding hope that comes from knowing that you have been here before, that you have faced your darkness and emerged into light. You begin to see that the struggles you have endured are not signs of weakness, but of resilience. They are the raw materials of a life built on authenticity. You start to trust the process, even when it is messy and unpredictable. You learn to lean into the uncertainty, not with dread, but with curiosity. And with every small act of courage, every time you choose to speak your truth, every time you allow yourself to rest, every time you say no without apology, you rebuild a little piece of yourself that had been lost to the demands of the world. In these moments of gentle revolution, you also begin to see the interconnectedness of your own healing with the healing of others. You notice that as you step into your own truth, you become a beacon for those who are still wandering in the dark. A kind word, a shared smile, a silent nod in understanding. All these become subtle invitations for others to also return to themselves. The energy of authenticity is contagious. It ripples outward, touching lives in ways that you may never fully understand. And in that quiet interconnection, you come to realize that your journey is not a solitary one. Even in moments of profound solitude, you are part of a larger community of souls, each on their own path, each carrying their own stories of loss, healing, and rebirth. As the seasons change, you find that life begins to mirror this inner transformation. The once harsh edges of your world soften. The relentless pace of your days gives way to moments of deliberate stillness. You start to appreciate the beauty of small things, a bird's song in the early morning, the feel of soft rain on your skin, the way the golden light filters through the trees in the late afternoon. These are not trivial details. They are the poetry of existence. And as you become more attuned to these moments, you realize that they are the very essence of meaning. It is not found in grand accomplishments or monumental events, but in the quiet, persistent miracle of simply being. And so you continue to evolve, step by fragile step, learning that the journey back to yourself is not measured by milestones or checklists. It is a process of continuous, gentle becoming, a lifelong dance with your own truth. There will be days when the path feels steep and the weight of old habits threatens to pull you down. There will be moments when you doubt whether the silence will ever yield answers. But even in those moments, remember that every breath you take in the present is a victory. Every act of self-kindness, every honest conversation with your inner child, every time you allow yourself to just be, is a declaration of your worth. And in that declaration, you reclaim the power that was always yours. In the end, you learn that the meaning of life is not something to be chased like a fleeting prize. It is something that unfolds quietly as you return to yourself, as you let go of the need to constantly prove your worth to a world that has its own agenda. It is in the moments of deep stillness, when you look around and truly see the wonder of being alive, that you discover the profound truth. You are already enough. The universe, in all its vastness and mystery, exists within you as much as it exists outside you. And the more you embrace that, the more you realize that life's most precious secrets are not hidden in the distance. They are found in the quiet, unguarded moments when you finally listen to your own heart. As you begin to walk more gently through your own life, you start to realize that not everything needs to be understood. Some things simply need to be felt. Some questions don't have answers, and some answers don't bring peace. You learn to stop searching for meaning in every detail, every event, every failure. Instead, you start to trust the unfolding. You start to believe that perhaps the meaning of it all isn't found in the outcome, but in the act of staying present through it. And this realization doesn't come all at once. It creeps in slowly, through the cracks left behind by pain, by change, by the persistent whisper of your soul that says, you don't need to figure everything out to be at peace. There was a woman who had spent years trying to understand why things had turned out the way they had, why the people she loved left, why the dreams she chased always slipped just beyond her reach. She went to therapists, read books, studied psychology, astrology, spirituality, anything that might offer an explanation. She was hungry for clarity, desperate for answers. But clarity, like peace, cannot be forced. One evening, she was sitting by the ocean, the waves crashing with a steady, timeless rhythm, and she realized she didn't need an explanation. She needed rest, not just physical rest, but soul rest, the kind of rest that comes when you finally allow life to be what it is, without needing to control it. That moment changed her, not in a way that made the pain disappear, but in a way that made space for something new. She began to shift her questions, from why did this happen, to how can I meet this moment with grace, from what's wrong with me, to what part of me needs love right now. She stopped trying to dissect her life like a puzzle and started living it like a poem. And in that shift, she found something far more powerful than answers. She found peace. You begin to see this pattern in your own life too. The more you stop resisting what is, the more life opens up to you. The people who are meant for you start to arrive, not because you chase them, but because you finally created space for them to find you. The things you need begin to flow, not because you force them, but because you stop blocking them with your fear, your doubt, your tight grip on what you thought life should look like. And in this spaciousness, you begin to breathe more freely. You begin to trust not just in life, but in yourself. You start to see that most of your suffering wasn't caused by what happened. It was caused by your resistance to what happened. By the way you told yourself that things shouldn't be this way, that you should be further along, that you should be stronger, happier, more successful. You carried these shoulds like weights around your neck, mistaking them for truth. But now you begin to question them. You begin to ask, says who? And when no clear answer comes, you begin to drop those burdens, one by one, until your soul feels light again. There was a man who had lived his life trying to be good. Not just kind, but good in the way society demanded. Strong, reliable, emotionless. He never asked for help, never let himself cry. He wore responsibility like armor, believing that vulnerability would make him weak. But that armor had grown heavy. It had begun to suffocate him. One night, sitting alone after a long day of holding everything together, he broke. Not in a dramatic way. He simply laid his head in his hands and let the tears come. And for the first time in his life, he didn't try to stop them. He let himself feel everything he had been holding back for years. And afterward, he didn't feel broken. He felt free. That's the paradox of healing. The moments you think will destroy you are often the ones that deliver you back to yourself. The feelings you fear most are the ones that lead you home. You realize that your strength is not in how much you can endure without breaking, but in how deeply you can feel without running away. You learn to trust your emotions, not as enemies to be silenced, but as guides to be honored. They are not signs of weakness. They are proof that you are alive. And in this renewed relationship with your own inner world, you begin to show up differently in the outer world. You speak more honestly. You listen more deeply. You stop trying to convince people to love you, to stay, to understand. You realize that real love does not require performance, that true connection does not come from changing who you are,